Welcome back. As President-elect Trump forges ahead with filling out key posts within his administration, NBC News has new reporting about what day one of Mr. Trump's second term will look like. Transition officials tell NBC News that aides plan to roll out a flurry of executive actions aligned with campaign promises on the military and immigration for Trump to sign on his very first day in office. And joining me now is NBC News Digital senior White House reporter Peter Nicholas, who had this great reporting. So, Peter, what are you hearing from Trump officials about these executive actions that will happen on day one, and what will they include?
Well, we may see as many as half a dozen executive orders dealing with immigration alone. This is a much faster pace than we saw in 2016. And Trump is trying to make good on the promise that he's going to seal up the border. He's going to begin the process of deporting people who are living here illegally, with a focus on those who might represent national security threats. So he's going to convey a sense of action and purpose, all consistent with his campaign promises. And
when you think about that, you're thinking about campaign promises. He talked about literally ending the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East at warp speed, he said.
Yes.
Are those foreign policy issues still a top sort of concern of his when you think about all the stuff that he's saying about mass deportations and all the other things? Is foreign policy still at the top of mind?
Certainly. There's some concern that that this approach may be too scattershot. We talked to Newt Gingrich, for example, former House Speaker and a close Trump ally, who said if you try to do too much, you may find yourself failing to enact some of the core promises. So he mentioned tax reform, which is another promise, which also requires some focus. But yes, I mean, ending the war in Ukraine and Gaza is going to be a priority, but that's a diplomatic measure. That's something that's going to take some time. But you'll see movement on that quickly on the diplomatic front.
Yeah. I also want to ask you, it's interesting, you talk about all the movement that's going to happen. Trump walks in as a lame duck. I wonder how much that impacts his pace and his sense of urgency.
Well, I think that's exactly right, Yamiche, that in 2026, we're going to be moving, Congress's focus is going to be on the midterm elections. So there's really only a year and a half window for him to take advantage of his high political capital and try to execute this agenda. So, and then, before we know it, people will be looking at 2028 when Trump can't run again. So this is his window where he really has to make good on these promises. And that's why I think you're going to see movement on so many fronts.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you think about sort of the movement that you're going to see. Do you think that Democrats are going to have sort of the wherewithal to push back on any of this? Or because they're executive orders, it's just going to happen?
I think a lot of it is just going to happen. And I think Trump feels he has a mandate. He feels it was a decisive victory. Democrats are in the minority. I mean, the Republican majority in the House and Senate is kind of thin, but Democrats are certainly going to try to be the resistance as best they can. But I think the public is of a mood to give Trump a chance and, to see if he can enact these priorities.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how much of a leeway he has to do all this. But thank you so much, Peter Nicholas.
Thank you, Mish.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.